everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Before we get started, I just want to remind you that, of course, Tuesday is the election. You'll probably be busy if you haven't already voted, might be out at the polling place. But once you get home, you're going to want to know what happened, what's going on. Are there shenanigans? Are they actually counting the votes this time? Is it going to be 3 weeks before we know who's going to be president? Breaking down all the important information are your favorite Blaze hosts, including me. I'll be in studio giving you live coverage on election night. So if you'd like to join us and get some of the best election coverage around, make sure you go to blazeelection.com/Auron to get $40 off your Blaze TV membership. That's blazeelection.com/Auron. So I'm sure many of you have seen the, well, let's say, lack of momentum on the left. It feels like Kamala Harris had this original burst of energy. She had a lot of the internet momentum going for her, or at least that was the illusion that was put out with all of the different Democratic propaganda. The polls were a little bit in her favor, but these numbers have been slipping, and gaffe after gaffe is coming out, making her chances look less and less favorable. Joining me here to discuss all of that today is Patrick Casey. He is the host of Restoring Order and also writes a number of great columns. Thanks for coming on, man.
It's always a pleasure to come on. Thank you for having me, Auron.
Absolutely. So the breaking news, I guess, here recently is Joe Biden's comments. Now, it feels a little bit like maybe Joe is trying to get that last revenge, in there after Kamala Harris, did this small coup against him, this digital coup against him, posting the letter on Twitter saying he was done. But recently he was discussing Trump supporters and he said that they were garbage. He referred to Trump supporters as garbage. This really feels like it echoes the sentiment put out by Hillary Clinton that was, kind of credited for her disastrous loss to Trump during 2016 when it comes to the basket of deplorables. Of course, the left is covering this up saying, oh, well, that's not really what he meant. That's not really what he said. But at this point, do you think that's going to have any impact on people?
No, I really don't. I think it's very obvious now that people who support Donald Trump or, are considering supporting him understand that there is this weaponization of just about every powerful institution against people who do support Trump. Anyone who understands the Trump phenomenon knows that since he, maybe not the minute he came down the escalator, but once the establishment realized that he was a threat, they've been attacking him and they've been attacking his supporters. So, the front page of Politico today was story after story about this whole, this whole garbage thing. And, they were trying to present it objectively. I think they were kind of doing damage control. But everyone understands, I think, on some level that this is how every powerful institution in the country, not just the Democratic Party, of course, views the average Trump supporter, right? And, if you're straight, white, Christian, male, on top, the more specific you get, right, they hate you even more. So it's not much of a surprise. And no, I don't think the damage control that they're doing right now is really going to help.
Yeah, it's very strange when you spend your entire, last 8 to 10 years talking about how white Christian males are the worst people on the planet. They're the cause of all problems. And then suddenly you recognize, oh, we might need a few of these people to get elected. Like they're actually a sizable part of the population. So we've seen this scramble from Kamala and the rest of her campaign to suddenly try to include Tim Walz is playing Madden like a real man, sitting around on
Right.
doing his Twitch streams. Like, this is how we're going to appeal to the male youths. And you see this effort, but it's like, man, you have a decade or more at least of just vitriol and hatred stacked up against these people. And you can't even help yourself. Like, yeah, you go out there and you put this message out, but then 10 minutes later, you got somebody like Joe Biden blurting out the obvious truth of how you feel.
Yeah, well, we always appreciate it when they let the mask slip and when they say the quiet part out loud. They're kind of doing our work for us. Yeah, thanks. Please keep saying that, honestly. I think the context for how Joe Biden came to say this is really funny as well, because he was responding to, you had this comedian, I'm going to butcher his name, but he spoke at the Madison Square Garden rally. He was like the second person to speak. I was there. It was an incredible event. And I remember he was saying some pretty edgy stuff, not just about Puerto Rico, by the way, but he did refer to Puerto Rico as, the joke was something like, there's this floating pile of garbage out there in the ocean, getting people to think he's referring to like the Pacific, guy or whatever. And he said, it's called Puerto Rico. And, haha. I mean, I thought it was kind of funny. It didn't even cross my mind at the time that, maybe you shouldn't be saying that in the run up to the election when you're trying to court Hispanic voters. Okay. I understand those talking points, but people right of center just need to ignore it. You're kind of doing the enemy's job for them when you're just continuing to highlight this and saying, oh, yeah, this is a big deal. Just ignore it. It's not like Trump said it. It's not like, it's fine. But the point is that Biden was responding to this. So this was something that the Democrats, who have been very desperate, attempted to seize on. And they were, you even had people right of center. I'm seeing in group chats, people were kind of concerned. Is this going to hurt Trump? And then what happens? Well, Biden comes in to save the day, and he refers categorically to Trump supporters as garbage. And I don't even see the Puerto Rico thing in the news. It's just been so overshadowed by the Democrats and their apparatchiks in the media running cover, trying to do damage control. So, I mean, it's almost like a providential just reversal. It's incredible to see. So I'm feeling just as good as I was, a week ago about this upcoming election.
Yeah, it really was strange to watch that because, as you said, the Democrats saw this opening and they're like, "Oh, maybe this is it, right? Like we need one last thing. Maybe this will ruin his chances with Hispanic voters if we can just spin this out as some kind of gross hatred." They started calling the whole thing a Nazi rally. At some point there was an America First rally at Madison Square Gardens, and so now this is the same thing, and this has got the whole spirit to it. They're insulting minorities, and no matter how many times they cut to Jewish guys doing prayers in the middle of the rally, but whatever, right? Like just basically the same thing. And the fact that they were so desperate for this, they're just screaming fascist, Nazi rally. He's Hitler. Like it's really all they have left. And even when you put an insult comic, and we can debate whether or not putting an insult comic at the beginning of your rally was the best choice. But then someone just pointed out that like Don Rickles was at a Republican rally, so this it's not like this is some weird thing no one's ever done. But ultimately, there's just this desperate attempt to throw anything, one more racism. If we can just convince them that there's one more racism happening, this will seal the deal. But eventually, like you said, Biden's kind enough to just judo this entire thing and completely switch the news cycle to something which is far worse for the left than I think the Puerto Rico thing ever would have been for Donald Trump.
Yeah. It's been incredible to watch. People start worrying about something and it just magically resolves itself. So, all right.
Well, I want to get deeper into the momentum shift, Kamala Harris having huge problems with the legacy media on top of all of this. And I want to get to a piece that you just had recently on Donald Trump and the role that he's going to play in the future of the Republican Party. But before we get to all that, guys, let's hear from today's sponsor. Hey, guys, if you're looking to break into the world of fully remote jobs, I want you to listen closely. There's a new job stacking program focused solely on how to land remote jobs, even if you don't have any remote work experience. The new Remote Work Mastery program is designed to get you to successfully implement the strategies that allow you to leverage your current skill set, whatever that happens to be, into a fully remote role. No need to learn any new complicated skills like coding or finance. This is all centered around what you already have experience with. There are a lot more remote job opportunities in today's marketplace that go beyond the typical IT job set. The job stacking team will walk you through the entire process of identifying suitable remote positions that adjust to your experience, optimizing your resume, and acing your job interview so that you're set up for success in the world of remote work. So if landing a remote job is something that you're interested in, go to jobstacking.com/masterremote and schedule a call with Rolf today. All right, guys, so back to Kamala Harris and the disaster that has really befallen her campaign as she heads into the stretch here. Now, I pointed out pretty early on when everyone was, oh, Kamala Harris, it's going to be a huge problem. JD Vance is weird, all this stuff. I said, look, guys, this is all AstroTurf. This is purely inflated, engagement online. Kamala Harris has never been liked. She's never been popular. And yet there were so many people quaking. I think it's a lot of guys who just wanted Trump to fail. It's a lot of people, the constant, well, they don't call themselves never Trumpers because those guys went to, the Democratic Party, but the guys who are still hanging out on the right, but, wouldn't be sad to see Trump go away and get rid of their problems. They'd like the establishment conservatism to kind of go back to the way it was. But they were building up Kamala Harris as this force to be, very worried about. And to be really clear, guys, we're not here telling you, take anything for granted. Leave it all out in the field, go do your thing, make sure you're supporting everyone you need to be supporting. Not here to say anyone should get comfy, but it's very clear that things have shifted against Harris. And this is someone who was basically elevated by the legacy media to take the place of Joe Biden. He failed, spectacularly in that debate with Trump, and everyone panicked. And there was suddenly this cascade preference across the media who had been carrying water for Joe Biden, saying, oh, he's fine. Oh, he's great. He's as sharp as he's ever been. And then one day later is like, oh no, this guy is absolutely checked out. He should be in a nursing home. We need someone else. We have to elevate someone else now. They basically created this whole digital coup and put Harris in place. And now we're starting to see, stories being written, well, maybe we should have stayed with Biden, editorials coming out. And in fact, several major newspapers, including the Washington Post, have refused to do an endorsement. And these are endorsements that, of course, most people assumed would be for Harris. These are legacy papers that are very liberal. They almost always support the Democratic candidate. And even though she had a lot of problems, I think the Harris campaign was expecting to have all of these nominations, or rather all of these recommendations, kind of falling one after another, saying, oh, look, all these established, respectable publications are standing for us and not for Trump because he's dangerous, blah, 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 blah. I think that's what she expected. And they're all just refusing to endorse her. I mean, how much of a disaster is a candidate who can't even get the, endorsement of these incredibly liberal papers?
Mm-hmm. Pretty bad. That's the state of that candidate. I don't want to signify. I don't think it signals necessarily a huge vibe shift. Everyone's done with wokeness or whatever else. Obviously, people running, the federal bureaucracy, the people that have a lot of power, and still most of the media are they don't like Trump, and they're against everything he's about, of course. Now, the thing to keep in mind is I think that it's just a testament to how weak Kamala Harris is. I think Washington Post might be an interesting outlier there. I think a lot of tech CEOs have kind of concluded that, even regardless of what they believe personally, things are just going to be easier for them if a Republican, or at the very least not this kind of more extreme form of Democrat, is in office. Why is that? Well, I'm sure as anyone who's familiar with your work is already aware of the fact, the work of James Burnham as well. I know you've talked about that. Sam Francis with the Leviathan. Just kind of the idea that the capitalist class and the managerial class are kind of at odds. And, I don't agree with everything that Burnham wrote. I think most people who like his ideas recognize he didn't get everything right. Not all of those predictions came true. But the idea that there would be increasing state influence and control over industry, which would entail a class of managers or bureaucrats, clashing with and vying for power against kind of the old Monopoly man style of type of guy, which Jeff Bezos absolutely is. So there's definitely that. But just in general, I think a lot of these newspapers and others they don't think that Kamala Harris is going to win, so they're just going to think like, are we, whatever the next 4 years looks like, do we want to appear as neutral? I think that's just kind of it. I think if Kamala Harris was stronger, maybe with the exception of the Washington Post, but most of these publications would still be, siding publicly with the Democratic nominee.
Yeah, I think that some of them will do it to try to look more neutral. It will try to ingratiate themselves in what's going to be the order for the next few years. Some of them are doing it because they simply need to retain some level of credibility. How many times are you really going to go to a bat for a woman who's obviously just a disaster? You if you already know she's going to fail, are you really going to just dive onto that grenade, or is it just better to count your loss and move on? Like you said, most of them still hate Trump. Like they're still planning to spend the next 4 years screaming about, fascism is right around the corner and all these things. I don't think you'll see less of that rhetoric necessarily, as you pointed out. I don't think the woke is going anywhere, but perhaps saving a little bit of that rhetorical energy, not for a candidate who is obviously just not up to snuff. Now, your Bezos point is particularly interesting because, as you say, Burnham and Francis both point to the fact that you're going to have this clash between the managerial elite and the classic capitalist class. And it's really the tech bros, as you pointed out, the CEOs there, that have differentiated themselves, because while many other capitalists, have kind of rolled themselves into the managerial system, recognizing that most of their benefits going to come from scaling up with the government and creating these public-private partnerships that all of a sudden both parties love so much. But it's the tech bros that really understand that the government is ultimately just crippling their ability to advance things, that the managerialism is hindering their organizations and not helping. And the longer they end up in this, incestuous marriage with the managerial class, the more that their ability to reach the heights they want to and innovate they want to is really going to fail. And so someone like Jeff Bezos, who, might have had certain politics, I think it is a little funny that, his ex-wife donated all this money to super left-wing causes, and then he kind of pulled the rug out from under.
That might have a red pilling effect. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, but ultimately it is very interesting, that dynamic that guys like Elon, David Sachs, Mark Andreessen, all of these guys are recognizing that even though they're not classic conservatives, they're probably not socially conservative in most ways. I mean, Elon's got like 11 kids by several different women. That it's ultimately, it's return to harem. But ultimately, they understand that they're just not going to achieve the things that they want to achieve if they continue to allow this managerialism to creep into their organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, every part of the private sector, I'm sure, has to contend with regulations and whatever else. But for the tech industry, I think it's probably particularly egregious, just with regard. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg's another example. Right. He hired the Republican strategist. He's describing himself in private as a libertarian. He publicly, lamented the fact that there was somewhat of a small mea culpa. He said that he wishes that he hadn't gone along with the government to censor. So kind of shifting the blame, saying, I did it, but they're the main drivers, which actually isn't entirely wrong, because a lot of censorship, this has been one of the real revelations from the last few years with the Twitter files and all sorts of the stuff Mike Benz is doing great work over at Foundation for Freedom Online, I think it is, with just seeing how much censorship actually does stem from the government. A lot of they're woke employees and Facebook and YouTube and whatever else, but that's not the reason a lot of this stuff happens. So it's understandable that someone like Mark Zuckerberg and these others would think, like, I would rather just not have the government involved in my business, even if these guys, some of them are. I don't think Mark Zuckerberg's super right wing. Maybe he is, I don't know, but within that class there absolutely does seem to be a shift, and I think it's generally a good thing. I mean, I think we never should remain uncritical of people who want to lend their support. I mean, I've criticized some things Elon Musk has said. He still is pretty pro-legal immigration, which appears to be the big difficulty, the issue that a lot of these guys have difficulty with, just because I understand the tech industry is about scooping the talent and tenth out of various impoverished, war-torn nations around the world and bringing them here. But I think it's generally a positive sign, because, hey, one of the old NRX talking points that I remember, when I started reading this stuff back in 2016 was, you need elites, right? It's good to have, mom and, grandma and grandpa on your side. Sure. But like, you're going to need people who've got tons of money, and that's going to come with pros and cons. But at the end of the day, you just can't do it without powerful people. So.
Yeah, there has been a little bit of, crying and whining about these, moneyed elites shifting their alliances. And I understand the skepticism. You should absolutely be wary, especially as you point out, when guys like Elon have priorities like wide open legal immigration that could still have deleterious impacts on native born Americans here in the United States. But ultimately, the question is, like, what did you think this would look like, right? Did you think every one of these guys would suddenly have your personal ideological short list, loaded up, and they just immediately start spouting it the minute they join your team? Like, no, they're going to move because they see some kind of advantage. They're going to see the winds of power shifting. That's going to bring a certain level of gravitas to your side, to the people who you are influencing. But ultimately, you still have to work inside the realities of politics. And it's just a little short-sighted, I think, for people to say, oh, well, because Elon or somebody doesn't immediately spout everything I believe, therefore we're just not winning. We can't ever win. Nothing ever happens. These kind of things are kind of the way that a lot of people approach this.
Yeah, I saw people pointing out that Elon Musk was wearing some kind of like Baphomet or devil costume for Halloween a few years ago. And they were like, look, you thought this guy was on your side? Okay, well, that was for Halloween. He dressed up as like he had like a demon thing or whatever. And I understand if there are traditional Christians who like wouldn't want to be dressing like that or whatever, but it's like, okay, well, at a certain point, you have to not bite the hand that feeds you. I mean, if you look at everything, Elon Musk is a great example, right? Someone like Jeff Bezos, it remains to be seen. I like what he did recently, but it remains to be seen. Like, is he really on our side? But Elon Musk, with buying Twitter, paying us to use Twitter, which reinstating people like me, all sorts of people, has been huge. That's like a huge thing we have going for us this time around that we didn't back in 2020. 2016 was a little freer on Twitter than in 2020. But I mean, incredible stuff. And also just what he's doing in Pennsylvania, paying people in a legal way, mind you. But I do think it's very interesting with Elon. I think eventually these elites are going to come to realize that you can't go fishing at the Rubicon. I think that's kind of what Elon has recognized. And that's, so to speak, that if you're going to be a half-assed revolutionary, counter-revolutionary, if you're part of my language, but if you can't do some things, you can't do halfway, because you suffer the consequences of having, that are entailed by doing this thing, but you get none of the rewards. So I think Elon Musk, they're threatening to go after him with investigations over all sorts of things. And just look at what they did with McDonald's. Now, I don't know if that was 100% tied to, but after Trump went there, all of a sudden, no, Elizabeth Warren's accusing them of price gouging, and there's like E. coli investigations. Maybe that stuff was happening beforehand. I don't know. But the point is I think Elon gets it, right? He might not pass the ideological purity test, and good. Tell him, respectfully point out why he's wrong in his comments when he says this stuff. But to just write him off, he's like literally paying people to do what? To get, not to vote, but to get registered up in Pennsylvania. That's great. That's great. Even if he just bought Twitter, that would be enough on its own. But these are that, I've been in this not as long as some people, but longer than others. 2016, the idea of Elon Musk. I remember he like referenced demographics once in a speech in like 2017, and people were like, wait, what is he based? And then like, here we are. So, good things can happen, and they often will happen unexpectedly.
Now, Jeff Bezos, speaking of kind of NRX predictions, Jeff Bezos is an interesting specific case, because Curtis Yarvin has actually called out, he said, well, here's how the Washington Post works. They tell Jeff Bezos gets to sponsor them, and then they print whatever they want. They tell Jeff Bezos what to think. Now, obviously, there's been a shift in the actual endorsement, and there was there's a large amount of their readers that actually ended up, I think at least like 200,000. I think is that, which doesn't even sound right. Like, does Washington Post even have that large readership at this point? Anyway, the point being is that a large percentage of their people actually ended up walking away from paper because of this. Now, the other rumor has been that he is wanting to shift the editorial direction of the paper. That's a much different thing. It's one thing to say we're just not going to endorse this time around. Yeah. It's another thing to say we're actually going to go out of our way to hire conservatives. We want to see less bias. We want to seem like we have a more down the middle pitch. Again, I don't think this is a full transformation, but this could disprove a certain aspect of Yarvin's understanding of power. If you see, the Washington Post actually implement this, do you think you'll see any real conservatives get signed up over there? Is it just going to be add a David French and then move on?
Yeah, maybe he'd go with a David French. That'd be funny. I think he probably, for what he's trying to do, would know maybe to go a little, I don't know, maybe I was going to say Bari Wise, but I guess she doesn't, maybe like a Ben Shapiro column here and there or something, or I don't know, would he do Rod Dreher? That is a funny question to consider. Maybe Auron MacIntyre, who knows? Maybe Bronze Age pervert. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's one of these things where sometimes people will see a dark horse and they'll just jump on board because of self-interest. And I think that can be a good sign, but you don't expect too much from someone like that. Maybe other people, maybe they see a strong horse, but they kind of believe in it. It's kind of hard to know, but I think you will get both. And I think that there are a lot of people that are, especially wealthy, successful people, that are primarily motivated by self-interest, but it's a good thing if these people are still, shifting over in your direction, if for no other reason than because you have to. That's like rule number one of persuasion. You have to appeal to someone's self-interest. And if like this thing, like the right is capable of doing that, that's a good thing. One thing I wanted to mention that's kind of funny too is you talked about Yarvin's take on Jeff Bezos. People should be aware that Jeff Bezos knows who Yarvin is. I don't know if they've talked. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, but there was that Vanity Fair piece that was profiling what they referred to as the new right. There have been, 10 new rights. I don't know if we would refer to, the broader space as the new right, but But it was referring to like Yarvin and like NatCon and Peter Thiel and whatever else. Jeff Bezos actually tweeted out that article. He was like, this was a really interesting read. So, hey, you never know. At the very least, he's going to be someone interesting to watch.
I'd like to think that somewhere Jeff Bezos is just, binging a bunch of Paul Gottfried speeches from NatCon or something. That's a good.
Yeah, or a MacIntyre speech from NatCon.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, falling down the rabbit hole. But the other reason that I had you on is you just wrote a good piece for Chronicles. Speaking of Paul Gottfried, and in that piece you were discussing the importance of Trump. Now we already touched on this a little bit, but there's still a sizable contingent of the Republican establishment that they kind of, all right, Trump's back in office. I've got a MAGA hat somewhere. I'll dust it off. They kind of throw it in the background. But it's very clear that they are not a fan of the direction that Trump has taken. They had a very specific set of talking points, a very specific set of issues that were allowable frames that we were allowed to step into. And the fact that Trump constantly kind of disrupts those is a big problem for them. They're kind of hoping that he would just ride off into the sunset. Okay, he lost that election. Thank goodness. We'll get like Ron DeSantis or somebody in there. Trumpism without Trump. We'll get back to the business of being the very responsible party, these kind of things. But your piece pointed out that Trump really shifted a focus in the party that was good for the party. It started focusing on issues that were really critical. And it's not that the issues that they were focusing on previously don't matter. I care about, the fact that, gender surgeries are being offered to minors. Like, that does matter. I think we should, push back on these things. But the fact that these were the only topics that were really dominating, and things like immigration, foreign wars, protecting American jobs were just never open to the average person, even though this is what most voters really wanted to hear from the Republican Party, is rather significant. And I think it's really important for people to realize that a second Trump victory really solidifies his direction as the concerns that are being met by the Republican Party that the base really want to see addressed by their leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these ideas had been out there for a while. And, it's not just that these were fringe ideas, right? Obviously the paleoconservatives were marginalized and maligned. And, the people, I think the people who were made themselves all about representing, articulating, and expressing these ideas like immigration restriction, talking openly about the nature of race in America, right? Obviously not in an extreme way, but, race, communism, and affirmative action, things of that nature, group differences. The people who really made it their thing talking about these issues have been, and to some extent still are, marginalized for doing so. But these have been popular issues. A lot of people have wanted immigration restriction. If you look at Gallup has been keeping track of what Americans think of immigration for decades now. And for many decades, I can't recall off the top of my head just how many, but at least going back through the 20th century. And the most popular for almost the entire time that it has been measuring Americans' opinions on immigration, the most popular response has either been a plurality or a majority. It's fluctuated a bit of Americans who want less immigration, right? And there was only one time in 50, 60 years where Americans wanted more immigration. And that was during the summer of Floyd, so to speak. That was the time when Americans were just bombarded with an insane amount of insane social conditioning and brainwashing. And they briefly were like, oh yeah, diversity is great. Yeah, open the borders, bring them all in. And then they kind of snapped out of it. And that's funny because I was looking this up recently. Tracks with how Americans viewed Black Lives Matter, white Americans, that is. Most people saying, yeah, no, not a big fan of it. And then for that brief period from Ahmaud Arbery to the first few months of George Floyd, they were like, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter is great. But then they snapped out of it. So the point is that Trump brought these ideas that people, the whole giving a voice to the silent majority thing. Yeah, there's some truth to that. There's some truth to that. And the question is, when Trump is gone, how much of these ideas, the emphasis on these ideas will still be there, will remain. And I think it's safe to say that if it's the worst case scenario for keeping the flame lit, so to speak, for passing the torch during that, when we enter into the post-Trump era, we are still, it's as good, as based and red-pilled, or even more based and red-pilled than it is now. I think it should be very clear that Trump losing is in most cases going to only make it harder for us to kind of keep the momentum up and keep moving things in a more right-wing direction. So I can explain how that is. You can offer your thoughts. I don't want to rant the entire time.
Oh, no, it's fine. The very data that you're pointing to was actually the first thing that really red-pilled me before I had read Yarvin or any of these other thinkers, when I was looking at the immigration crisis in Europe, and I was like, well, none of their leaders are listening to them. I wonder what the track record is for America. And then I looked at the very stats that you're talking about, and I found that over the many decades, even on the left, illegal immigration was always wildly unpopular, and even legal immigration was often wanted to be reduced on the left. And the right, obviously, was even more dramatic. It was really only over the last decade or so that we've seen a significant shift in any of those numbers. So the fact that in both parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, just completely ignored the popular will on this was my first time where I said, okay, well, maybe democracy doesn't work exactly the way I understand it. If this is an issue that both left and right have agreed on for, well beyond my entire life, and yet no one on either party will actually run on this issue except like maybe Pat Buchanan, then what is happening here, right? And that really led me down the road to asking more questions. Yeah. And so I think the fact that Trump has brought these issues to the fore, the things that have been so dynamic and important to people for a very long time, but have just been denied by both parties, is critical. Now, I wonder, as you say, what the shift will look like, because, first, obviously, Trump has to get reelected, which will be its own question. There have been several Democratic officials. There have been several papers who have encouraged this. There's been articles about this. They're already saying that they should do the thing they accused Trump of doing the whole time, which not certify the election. That there have been sitting Democratic representatives and senators who have said, actually, we can't certify this guy because we believe he's violated the 14th Amendment. And the Supreme Court did leave that process open. They did leave that question somewhat open, saying it ultimately had to be determined by the legislature and not by the judicial branch. So there is still an opportunity, even if we do see a Trump win. We're seeing the different stories about, oh, well, be careful, red mirage, it'll look like he's winning at the beginning, but after we count the votes for a month and a half, eventually we'll find out it was actually Kamala Harris. Do you feel like it's going to be a push to the end where they're going to try to get her across the finish line? At first, I thought that might be the case, but it feels like the momentum and the energy just might not be there. If the gap is wide enough, can they really force her through if they don't have the votes?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm already seeing the beginnings of, I think it is going to be kind of a messy process regardless of who wins. Now, we understand which side has more institutional power. I think the preferred way, I don't know how much you can really say on YouTube here, but I'll try to be mindful of my words. But I think the preferred method for blocking Trump is the kind of funny business we saw in 2020, stuff like that. The idea that Trump is declared winner, but they don't end up certifying him. It just seems like, I find it hard to believe they would do that. Now, I don't know. I mean, do you see all of these clips from, regime, operatives, basically? It could be in the national security state, politicians, where they're terrified, right? Mark Milley, he's saying he's worried he's going to get court-martialed. You have, it was a high-level FBI official on, I believe, CNN or another mainstream media, TV news program a few months ago was saying him and all his colleagues are terrified that Trump's going to put them in jail. Okay, look, if these guys broke the law, then they deserve to be in jail. Great. But not to put a damper on things, but, we had Trump the first time around. I wonder if there are people working in the regime who are like, we lived through 4 years of Trump. We probably can do 4 years again. But maybe, I don't know. There is a lot that can be done against them. I hope that he gets in and, through lawful means does that. But it's really hard to say. I think there is a big question mark as to how this transition of power happens. Because look, I don't want to black pill. I've seen people saying, well, if Trump loses, then what's even the point of doing any of this? And I understand where people are coming from. I'm not going anywhere. It's going to be really bleak for the right. Might take a few week or two off Twitter if it just doesn't go the way we want it to. But the thing is, if Trump loses, it's going to be two things. It's going to, and both of which are for different reasons, very damning and disturbing realities we'll have to grapple with. The first one is that America rightfully, through no funny business at all, decided that he would rather have Kamala Harris as president than Donald Trump, which I know there are people that dislike Trump, but if we can't win this one fair, that's rough. What elections can we win, right? And the second one is that this just goes to show that they can manufacture the outcome that they want, we'll say, in elections, without the pandemic being there. That's the thing. Now, some states, their election laws are similar to what they had in the pandemic, but overall, my take has always been that they were able to pull it off once at that great of a scale because the pandemic created the cover to do so. But yeah, I'm still going. I said 60-40 Trump wins. I would raise it to 80-20 right now. And if Trump ends up losing, I'm going to ask you to take this. We'll pretend this didn't happen. I'll ask you to take the episode down. Yeah. But so I'm not. No, don't get blackpilled. But yeah, we got to win this one. So everyone should get out. Bring your family out there. If you know friends who aren't registered. Well, it's probably too late in a lot of places. Just do whatever you can to legally ensure that everyone votes for Trump. So.
Yeah, the real question is, where is Patrick Casey's bets place? Does he have those poly market, numbers out? But so let's assume for a moment that we get a Trump victory here. A second Trump administration. A lot of people have looked at Donald Trump. He did a lot of good things. We saw border crossings drastically reduced, but we never got a wall. Many of the deportations that were kind of promised previously did not happen. Obviously, there's been a lot of rhetoric around, especially the mass deportation issue, right? J.D. Vance, I think, laid out good defense of what that looks like. It doesn't mean you have to physically move people across the border continuously all the time, though some of that would be necessary. But ultimately, you can go ahead and penalize employers. You can cut off welfare benefits. These kind of things are going to naturally create this. We had, I'm trying to remember, I think it was 60 Minutes, some people saying, oh, well, if some of my family gets deported, I have to go too. And they were saying this as if it was a terrible thing. And you put out a tweet like, no, I would do this all day. Like this is a solution to the problem.
A wink of sleep. I could deport 1 million illegal. Yeah, that was, that tweet really blew up and a lot of people were unhappy with it. But, the right people, the kind of people you want to be unhappy with your tweets. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about the first Trump admin's record on immigration. I think that some people try to whitewash it a little bit, just because they want people voting for Trump, and I am sympathetic to that somewhat. I think Trump tried to do a lot of good stuff, and he should have done it differently. He maybe should have done more. Okay, but the people who say that Trump did nothing or are absolutely wrong, especially with illegal immigration. Okay, Trump endorsed the RAISE Act. Congress just didn't pass it. The RAISE Act is not perfect, but it would have cut legal immigration in half. And going back to the tech, people situation, these are, quickly becoming this class of right-wing elites. I think a good compromise that I don't know any of these people, but if I ever run into them, I'd love to run it by them, is, and maybe some are watching now, is, I understand that these guys want like smart people to come here and work in tech companies, but most people who come over here legally are like not doing that, right? I don't think they are. They tend to be a little bit of a higher caliber than the, average Haitian just, walking across the border or whatever. But I think that lowering legal immigration a lot, but ensuring that, the people who do come in are very high caliber. Maybe I'd prefer an immigration moratorium, but I mean, Trump did a lot of stuff. He did get a lot of money for a border wall. He had to fight for it. He had to shut down the government. And, a lot of it was replacement stuff. It wasn't the wall that we wanted, but I mean, he did build some stuff. And I think that maybe there's a case to be made that, if most people are crossing over in certain areas, well, maybe there's already a wall there, but maybe you want to make it stronger. Maybe that is the right way to do it. Should he have done more in that regard? Yeah, it would have been great. But the Biden administration undid a lot of policies that Trump did, like remain in Mexico, some of these things. So Trump tried, and he should try harder the second time around. But with the mass deportations, everything that he does, they're going to face a lot of pushback. That's the thing to keep in mind as well. It's going to be a battle to get this stuff done. For sure.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Now, the other concern, and you kind of touched on it there, but I want to expand it a little bit. And I want to say from the outset that while Trump is an outsider and he's just a New York Democrat in most ways, he still did more for conservatives than basically any conservative president has done in my lifetime. So everything I'm saying here is with this caveat. Understand, I'm not saying, oh, well, Trump is worse than Mitt Romney or George Bush or any of these people. He's much better. But a lot of people have pointed to the fact that obviously Donald Trump is basically a New York Democrat, but he also has, some key members like Elon Musk and, RFK and all of these people who are basically, it's a pile of people who would say, I didn't leave the left left me, right? It's a bunch of people who are a coalition of those that basically got expelled from the moderate Democratic wing, and now they seem to have taken over a large percentage of kind of what MAGA is. And so a lot of people are concerned that ultimately this is just going to basically turn his administration into the Bill Clinton kind of administration, which, don't get me wrong, we could do worse, sadly, at this point than Bill Clinton, but it is a definitive shift to the left on many issues, some of them social, which I think, it is where I know a lot of Trump supporters are like, well, we can never talk about those. We should just get rid of that. It's all economics. It's all immigration. I think immigration is absolutely the most important issue, but I don't think we should just discard that stuff or shift radically left on it either. What do you think about those concerns?
Sure. I mean, there are valid concerns. I think a lot of this has to, there is Trump not being perhaps the most socially conservative guy in his private life, aka / public life, since a lot of this stuff has been made public as a result of his, him taking a stand for the country. But in the future of social conservatism, people these days are just less socially conservative than they used to be. And I think that's unfortunate. I'm not a complete, I don't want to say fuddy-duddy. I'm pretty moderate on a lot of these issues, which by today's standards is like pretty far right, I guess. But I think a lot of it is just the right has to win votes. And there are concerns that, people being too socially conservative is gonna lose votes. So, but with regard to like once you've already gotten in, I don't know. I think the main battles that social conservatives care about are things that are not, it's just so egregious at this point. Like a lot of like the child trans stuff in particular is crazy. And I think a lot of people who, I don't think that's a terribly socially conservative position. Maybe these days it is, but it seems like stuff like banning gay marriage federally, banning abortion federally. I don't know how that happens at this point. Maybe there just has to be like generational procession and you get a newer, younger generation that's just tired of things. I don't know if that is Gen Z. I see a lot of the stuff. They're having less premarital sex. They're drinking less. Okay. But it's also probably because they're watching porn more and like not going outside. Yeah. So I'd be quick to ascribe a lot of these to like Gen Z being categorically based or something. But I don't know. I think a good compromise is, I would support a more socially conservative, of course, but I think that leaving it up to the states is probably pretty good. The country, even if we get like a based right-wing regime change, is going to be really diverse. It should have never been this ethnically, religiously, politically diverse, culturally diverse, right? All of this is kind of a mistake, frankly. So, but we have to just contend with the fact that, sure, I guess you could deport every person who's a liberal or every person who isn't of your European, I don't know, but no one's actually proposing this stuff. So I think like you could having some states be really socially conservative, other states less so, is probably like going to be the next battle. And then, after that, we'll see. So.
Yeah, I think JD Vance told a really hard truth, and a lot of people, again, and I want to be clear. I think there are people for whom, say, abortion is, one issue. They are a single issue voter on that, and they do passionately care about that. But unfortunately, there were a lot of people who also just use that as a cover for I still hate Trump and I would like a reason.
Oh yeah,
find some reason, some excuse, even though I don't have another candidate to vote for, to just sabotage him. A lot of people did not set themselves up as serious political actors after that moment because, recognizing like, yes, you always should advance the pressure on your candidate to some extent after you win. That's what the left does. That's why they're constantly moving to the left. That's why they're always winning those battles, because their activists are willing to be relentless. However, you should also recognize the difference between like applying constructive pressure and then just like completely destroying your credibility at the table, right? Like if this guy goes out of the way and secures the victory that you have been looking for decades upon decades upon decades, and then is like, okay, well, let's do what we said we were going to do. And you're like, no, we have to be way different than what we said we were going to do. And you have to do something that makes you incredibly unpopular. well, you should understand what you're asking, right? Like you should know what you're doing at the negotiating table, and you're basically sidelining yourself, which is a tragedy because I think those people should have an important voice at the table, but you've kind of put yourself in a scenario where why would this person listen to you, right? Like I did this thing for you, you got this, it's like everyone laughed at the libertarians when Trump sat there and said, I'll put someone in the cabinet for you, and they all booed him, right? And everyone's like, how dumb of the libertarians to do that, but then they're basically doing the same thing on this issue. And JD Vance gave a good answer. He said, look, we turned it over to the states, and what we found out is after many, many decades, the states had shifted their opinion. The opinion of the people had shifted, right? And ultimately, that's what federalism does. When you return something to the states and you find out that the people of the states disagree with you, then you have a new job, right? Like you've returned things back to the way they should be legally. Roe was a disaster legally. But now you have to actually have the conversation. You have to have the moral conversation. You have to have the political conversation. You need to change hearts and minds, or you need to change culture. And that was something that was very difficult for a lot of conservatives to hear. But I think it's the right approach. It's like, look, we got to go earn those votes. We got to go make the case. We got to, change the incentives, change the structures, but also change, kind of the moral direction. And that's going to take more than just, political lectures. And that's a much larger task. And people don't want to hear that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If people are just not voting for it, and unfortunately, in a lot of even red states, voters are rejecting some of these anti. I mean, I think abortion is horrible. I'm Catholic, so obviously there's like a categorical no abortion position. In some cases, like if the mother's gonna die or like rape or something, I don't know. It's I hope I never have to be in a position where to make that decision. But but still, at the end of the day, you can find it horrific. You can dislike it, hate it for religious or secular or both reasons. But at the end of the day, politics is about the art of the possible, right? As Bismarck said, and that's recognizing that, like it or not, there are limitations on what can be done. You can challenge those. You can try to open up space to do stuff like you've talked about. But until you've done that, until you get to that point, you kind of have to operate within those parameters, and that's just where we find ourselves. So,
all right, Patrick, we're stacking up some of our super chats here, so we're going to go to them in a moment. But before we do, where can people find your work? I know you had some trouble with YouTube, but I know you're still doing spaces on Twitter and writing and all those things. So
sure, yeah, I have a Rumble. I haven't podcasted in a little while. I should probably get back to doing it, but I've just shifted over more to writing. I lost YouTube, so that's where most of my audience was. I see some names in the chat, some of the good remnants of the YouTube days. If people want to go to patrickcasey.com, subscribe to my Substack, that would be awesome. If they want to follow me on Twitter at RestoreOrderUSA, that would be great. Those are probably the two places that I'm the most active these days.
All right, let's go over to the questions of the people here. Corbin says, just Casey. There he is.
Great chat. Great super chat.
Let's see here. Michael Robertson says, I'm calling it now. Biden's final grand act of defiance will be to go on Rogan over the weekend. 3 hours of Joe Biden. What would that look like?
That would be incredible. If only.
Right. Yeah, he can. I don't know how long he can go on about corn popping his favorite ice cream, but I'd be up.
Who knows what would come out of his mouth?
Elijah Timon says the Washington Post non-endorsement suggests that a part of the total state sees Trump as a necessary evil to get young men on board with war with Iran and China. Yeah, this is kind of my buddy academic agent's theory that the regime wants Trump, that ultimately they, now it might be that they've gotten close enough to where some of them are making peace, but I think this idea that they've folded Trump in because he's going to be the guy that gets middle America back into the military so they can go on these foreign wars. I mean, it seems like Trump was pretty resistant to the entire foreign conflict thing when he was in office. That's been one of his biggest talking points. I'm a little skeptical of the fact that like all of a sudden he's going to be getting everyone from Appalachia recruited up to go charging into Iran, but maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
Yeah. So, okay. So the super chat just disappeared, but I still remember what it said. Thanks. So I think people paint with too broad a brush, and I think academic agent kind of does this too much. It's a part of the total state. It's you have different classes, and again, we talked about, I think, looking at it as, there's the private public partnerships, sure, but understanding that these CEOs it's not too far-fetched to consider that they are pondering a world in which the federal government has less control over them. and they're thinking, I don't want these bureaucrats, managing every little thing. Elon Musk's a good example. I mean, they hit Tesla with the civil rights lawsuit, hostile work environment, and had to pay up, $100 million or something a few years ago. So that's the kind of stuff. And that's just one example. So the idea that like the Washington Post via Jeff Bezos is like really worried about trying to get Jeff Bezos really wants war with Iran and China. Does he? I don't know. Maybe there's a case to be made that he'd get more military contracts. But honestly, the big business wing of the Republican Party is not really very pro-war. Like the Koch brothers, whatever you could say about them, to my knowledge, I think they're like relatively anti-war. Maybe that's the only good thing you can say about them. I don't think Trump is, this whole idea that Trump wants to go to war with Iran is ridiculous. And in fact, JD Vance, it's like people are just ignoring Trump's anti-war record, and they're also ignoring everything he said. Trump says he doesn't want war. He said we shouldn't be involved in regime change in Iran, even though he hates Iran. JD Vance recently said that as much as he likes Israel, it's important to understand that we have different interests, that, you can like Israel, but also recognize that America going to war with Iran isn't in our interest. I mean, that's like a dissident right talking point, right? That's like a more sober critique of the U.S.-Israel relationship. So now the China thing is different because I'm reading this book, the 100-Year Marathon, about China's plans, and like it really does look like, whether or not we like it, China like wants to confront us. I think they're all but very openly developing technology, and they've been talking about this for some time. So I don't want to go to war with China, but if they're bringing it to us, obviously we want to be prepared. I just it's an interesting angle to consider. I just don't think it's anything to worry about in this regard.
Yeah, kind of exactly along those same lines there. Philosophical Thirstworm says the problem with the counter elite is that said elite are often hijacking a movement from the people, i.e. Trump stapling green cards to diplomas and Iran warmongering with Bill Ackman little hats. Yeah, I mean, again, this is a lot of the Iran stuff. Like, are we really being driven to a war with Iran on the Republican side with Trump? I'm pretty doubtful, though he has talked about stapling green cards to diplomas. I mean, what do you think about that?
Sure, obviously, and this is an example. I've never been like a Trump cheerleader. I've always thought Trump was this great, like almost providential figure, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to critique him. Yeah, I called it out. I think that's bad. But people, like, again, he was in office the first time around. He signed off on legislation that would have cut legal immigration in half. Net migration did go down under Trump. So if you're concerned with the Great Replacement, he could have limited the numbers more, but net migration did go down. That's the kind of thing you call him out for. But also he was specifically talking about, I don't want him to do that, but he's also talking about like a relatively small number of legal immigration overall. So the idea that I have seen people like he's going to throw open the floodgates, we're going to get even more legal immigration than we're getting right now. It's just like, that just isn't what happened the first time. And, seizing on like one soundbite, even in 2016, what did Trump say? He was saying, like, he said pro-legal immigration things then. Okay, he's saying the same thing back then that he's saying now. And we should critique him because we have a different perspective. But again, the war with Iran thing, like, look, what could Trump realistically do with Iran? He might launch some missile attacks to take out like their nuclear stuff. Okay, would I prefer we're not involved there? Yeah, I absolutely support and have advocated for ever since the day I got involved in politics, U.S. disengagement from the Middle East. Absolutely. But the way you get there is by saying stuff like the way JD Vance said. It's not by, just posting like Europa the Last Battle documentary links and saying all sorts of other crazy things. So no, the war with Iran thing is overblown. And the last thing I'll say is I really look into like why are people saying this? It's Trump said, if Iran kills me, I hope we like blow them up. Okay, well, if Iran kills, me, I hope they,
right.
I hope like America blows them up. Screw them. And that's also deterrence. That's also peace through strength. These are the same people that act like World War III is going to break out if Israel does this, if Israel does that. Oh, Israel is going to invade Rafah, and then World War III. You're like, oh no. Right. Again, I don't want us to be involved in stuff over there, but like at a certain point, people have been predicting World War III at like every stage of the Gaza war, having some level of concern about, U.S. involvement and like something like that breaking out. But like when you've had a million wrong predictions about this, come on.
These countries have literally traded rockets with each other several times.
That's just what they do. Yeah, it's the Middle East, man.
Well, and I think it's important to, and I'm with you 100%. We should not be involved in these wars. I want to see a America first policy across the board, thinking of our interests, and our foreign policy should be oriented. We should care more about the integrity of our borders than any other nation's borders. That's where our
Absolutely.
troops should be. That's where our resources should be. That said, that doesn't mean you just immediately pretend like the rest of the world doesn't exist. Like, you're still the largest nation in the world, the most powerful nation in the world. You have to realize that force projection is somewhere, even if you're having a more American-centered part of your foreign policy, going to exist. You have to be strong, as you pointed out, peace through strength. So it's not like Trump can just come out and say, yeah, we're never going to go to war with anyone ever, no matter what they do. Like, that's stupid. That's like saying I would never fight back against someone who's punching me in the face. Like, it's not pacifism. You're not advocating for pacifism. We're advocating for a military doctrine that actually cares and prioritizes the United States. And if, by the way, you're worried that America's commitments to other foreign nations or specific foreign nations in the Middle East are a detriment to the well-being of the United States, then the first thing you should advocate for is a raising of consciousness of the interests of the United States, seeing the United States as a people, seeing the United States as a nation that has its own interest and should be focused on those and not on an empire and not on regional conflict somewhere else. If you're focusing and putting it in the terms that J.D. Vance was putting it in, you're just going to make much bigger inroads and you're going to draw a more popular understanding to your cause rather than coming out there and just being like, I can't believe it. It's just much better to focus and frame things in that way. I am for the American people, their interests, their defense, their borders. This is where the military should be. And to the extent in which we can focus on that and leave the Middle East to its own devices, that is what we should be doing.
Well said. I agree entirely.
Robert Weinsfield here says, how much is the Washington Post not endorsing Kamala, that they believe that their own trash and think if Trump wins, they'll be gulagged? Again, I think that they would see that as like a badge of honor. So I don't think they really pulled that because they're afraid of the wrath of Trump in a real material, we're going to be, going to jail for the rest of our lives type sense. I think they're doing it ultimately because it's going to sink their credibility. I really think at the end of the day, that's it. And obviously the pressure that is being put on them by Bezos. Again, I like to believe it's a revenge plot, from him after a bad breakup, but ultimately I think that those are the contributing factors, not so much that they actually believe that Trump is going to start jailing journalists. He's not Abraham Lincoln. Come on.
Yeah. I don't know if there are any I'm curious if there are any metrics that show, if there's any evidence that indicates that Kamala is going to win. I think it's going to be very close, and it's going to be that is kind of indicting of America that this election would even be close. But I mean, if you're looking at it from their perspective, yeah, they're like, what is there to look at to think that Kamala is going to win? Like the vibes, that she had some TikToks like artificially going viral for a week.
Doritos and coconuts or something. Yeah.
I don't know. So.
Yeah. New England refugee says, salute men, think they'll call it on election night. Yeah. It's really going to depend on that gap, right? Like,
yeah,
it's going to have to be pretty decisively for Trump, or, for Trump if they're going to call it for him. They'll want to pull that out as long as possible.
Yeah, it's anyone's guess. I mean, I don't think we're going to get Stop the Steal 2 just because if I don't know, even if there obviously is, I think Trump could do some challenges, but I don't think people are going to be really hesitant to want to get involved in that, just given how much lawfare was thrown at to even talk about it, honestly, because a lot of people like Fox News and was it Rudy Giuliani? Yeah, some of these people just got like hundreds of millions of dollars for just talking about it in some cases, let alone not, being the guy to submit the alternate slate of electors. So,
Rudy Giuliani is fighting to keep his like personal effects, like his dad's watch and stuff.
That's
after
crazy.
All of this. It's really horrific. Like it truly is the most political of prosecutions. It's very clearly just a personal destruction and humiliation ritual, having nothing to do with the actual law, and the fact that it's going on in this country at all is deeply shameful.
If Stop the Steal didn't work the first time, I don't think a second attempt would do so. But I think the real interesting thing to watch is, I mean, it looks like Trump is going to win. So if Trump wins and the other side, I don't know if they pull something else to, like refusing to certify. I think that's like pretty far fetched, but anything can happen, right? We, on this day back in 2020, we had no idea ride that we had just gotten on. So
very true.
Stay away from don't go out in public. Don't go to don't go to any rallies. I'll just say for the next you can go to a Trump rally, but
Genghis Krom says, is there any worry that the Republican Party's key takeaway from the election performance of the white guys for Harris angle will be an increased hesitation towards appealing to whites as a voter bloc? I don't feel like that ad in particular or that understanding is necessarily going to scare them away. Now, Jeremy Carl did a great piece on the one demographic voting demographic that they dare not speak their name, I think was the name of the piece about the unwillingness of the Republican Party to ultimately court young men, specifically white men, when it comes to voting for Trump. So that there is still real hesitation there, but I don't know if the white guys for Harris will be the thing that kind of suddenly puts them off.
White dudes for Harris. Yes, I hate to be a snob and correct there, but I'm trying to attribute this to the guy who said it. I forget who it was on Twitter, probably a good poster, maybe not, but he said something like, no, the white dudes for Harris is telling, because like white dude is kind of how a lot of the people left of center pejoratively refer to white man. Yeah, some white dude said this, right, or like, oh, these white dudes, blah, blah, blah. So it's just kind of like very, very thinly veiled resentment, even in the name. I don't know if that's going to be the takeaway. I think that the Republican Party is moving closer to some, I don't want to say like, maybe a soft white identity politics where it's not like whites versus everyone who isn't white or something like that, but it's like acknowledging that white people exist, acknowledging that some issues affect white people just as some issues affect blacks or Asians, any group in society. And that, the way that the left is talking about white people and has some, they have some clear malice. And saying this stuff back in 2016, it was, no one said anti-white, but like far right, dissident right-wing people. A lot of people who came to this stuff in the last few years, maybe even the last like year or two, I don't know, are just aren't really aware of like how much the needle has moved. The fact that anti-white is something like top level conservative pundits can say and do say is crazy. It's crazy. So I think there's no reason to doubt that things continue to move in that direction. Now, again, it's not going to be like hardcore like white nationalism, but there's a lot of room to talk about, the future of this country for white people under left-wing rule, and that in no way precludes talking about why other groups should be part of this coalition, and maybe they're harmed by leftism in different ways, right? They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and again, I encourage people to read Jeremy Carl's book on this issue. It really does lay it out in a very reasonable way, especially when it comes to developing coalitions and how that can be understood as a shared interest across the United States. I think that's really important part of his book as well. K-Max McDonald says, when Biden called Trump supporters garbage, is this like Hillary's basket of deplorables line, or have we come to expect this? These elites seem to hate the people they rule over. Yeah, this was kind of our opening discussion there, but I think we both kind of came to the conclusion that ultimately, it's getting harder and harder for people not to recognize that this is a common sentiment, especially on the left, but sadly, even in some right-wing elite circles, and that has to change. Ultimately, we need a ruling class that is aligned with the well-being of the United States. And if you're calling half of the United States on a regular basis garbage or deplorable, then that's just obviously not something that you're going to be engaging in.
Yeah, I mean, these are people that are primarily concerned, whatever they actually believe in, primarily concerned with power. And a lot of their hatred is just, you're not doing things for me. That's a big problem. And a lot of evil stems from viewing people as objects, not as full people, as just objects that exist to, provide value to you. You see this individually, inside, outside politics, and you see it like with these people in charge. I mean, sure, maybe Joe Biden hates like working class white people, but working class white people that love Joe Biden, yeah, he's probably fine with them. It's now he'll still support policies that are bad for them because that's just what it takes to be a politician in the Democratic Party. But yeah, no, they just hate people that aren't giving them power and are resisting the insane agenda that they're trying to foist on us.
Andrew Guler says, off-topic question, why didn't James Burnham have much of an influence on conservatism until recently? Did Bill Buckley torpedo his career? So yeah, that's a great question. I've actually asked this when I had like Mark Hemingway on, people who have written at the National Review. I'm like, do they just burn the Burnham books there? You're not allowed to know he worked there. He didn't have it, that he had a desk. He was part of the National Review. He was a well-read, respected conservative columnist in his time. I think ultimately, a lot of the wisdom of Burnham fell out of fashion as conservatism kind of continued this march towards irrelevancy under a Buckleyite understanding. And any of the things that Burnham could have added to the conversation were seen as dangerous. They were pushing against the status quo. His wisdom kind of fell off, though ultimately I still don't have a really good answer for you. It's amazing that this strain of thought didn't continue. I mean, guys like Sam Francis obviously kept it alive, and over the paleocons were very familiar with it. But the fact that this did not penetrate the wider sphere is very confusing. I mean, I'll just be blunt here. A large amount of the fact that I have any influence inside any mainstream platforms is because I'm like one of the few guys that was actually talking about James Burnham in these scenarios. Just taking the basic wisdom that he brought forward out of the Italian elite school and doing the same. I didn't reinvent any wheels here. I just read the guy and applied what he was saying, in kind of real time. And the fact that no one had done that really previously, at least in, obviously you had Yarvin and others doing it outside the conservative commentariat, but the fact that that wasn't done on a regular basis inside the establishment is truly baffling.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure someone like Mark Hemingway would be far more well-versed in, the history of someone like James Burnham within conservatism, but it feels like the critique of managerialism would not be very, there's probably a reason why the paleocons were okay with it and the neocons weren't. I mean, one of the interesting takeaways this year I read Gottfried and Fleming's book, The Conservative Movement. I highly recommend everyone read it. It's not too long. There's a lot of important stuff in there. But an important thing to keep in mind is the neocons, one thing that differentiated them from the old right, that eventually became the paleoconservatives, is that they had made peace with the welfare state to some extent. And the welfare state, the New Deal, a lot of that is, I don't know if you can pinpoint the exact birth of managerialism, but that was definitely an early and a significant point. So if you're a neoconservative, reading a critique of that might not be, maybe they agreed with some of it. Nightmare Vision had a great poster, great friend, had a post or a thread about reading some of the early neoconservatives compared to like what people say today were on some issues like pretty far to the right of. If that's not a sign of how far things have moved to the left, I don't know what is. But yeah, I would imagine for the neocon project, and they unfortunately ended up becoming the dominant force, which, by the way, again, we were talking about how Trump has changed things. Just because the right is pro-Israel does not mean it's neocon, right? There are a lot of other things to neoconservatism that people that were terrible, like getting canceled for supporting immigration restriction, whatever. And like the specific people who are neocons are totally marginalized at this point. So it's credit where credit's due.
Though I will say this, James Burnham's foreign policy was relatively neocon, detached from any interest around Israel. The Suicide of the West is in many ways a book about why America has to expand, that if you stop expanding, you're losing, you're dying as a civilization. So that's something that people often forget, while James Burnham's political analysis, I think, is rather insightful on many areas. He was not perfect. As you mentioned, some of his predictions did not bear out, and he was an advocate for foreign policy adventurism. So something to keep in mind, even though we are ultimately, I think, praising some of his larger contributions to the analysis there. Enjoyer says, looks like Democrats are stealing in Pennsylvania and Nevada. Thoughts, mail-in ballot ruling, fraudulent registration, Democrats putting down polling locations, attacks on GOP offices. Any thoughts on possible shenanigans underway?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. I've seen some of that in passing. I was out of town until I came back like late Monday. So I haven't kept up with everything, and I wouldn't be surprised, but I also, the unfortunate thing is when these things are happening, it's kind of like with the hurricane. I'm sure the government was doing crazy things, but everyone's tweeting out screenshots of their like military buddy, their buddy who works at DHS, and they're like, they're all this allegations, which some of which might be true, but you also don't know if people are just making stuff up, if they're genuinely mistaken, and given the emotions. And just to be clear, I absolutely do believe the government was negligent and maybe in some cases actively doing bad things in the case of Hurricane Helen. But it's just one of those things where like there's just so much out there. I'm seeing these allegations, and I just haven't verified like every little tweet. But I believe it. I believe it. It's important for people to remain critical though, because there's a lot of hysteria that gets generated over these. But yeah, maybe it's better to err on the side of caution and just assume all of the clips are true. Just sound the alarm. I don't know.
Well, yeah, this is a real problem for the right because so many of these institutions are completely corrupt. You whatever you think they're doing, they're actually worse. They're more evil than you believe them to be. But the problem is that because it's so corrupt and because it's so consistently some of these wild things into being true, people then just kind of go completely unfiltered. They don't take any time to think through any of the accusations or the viability, and then you get the scenario where people they buy into one wrong story, and then that's the one that the media uses to say, see, they're all conspiracy theorists, they all and so this is a real catch-22 for a lot of people, because if they don't believe what's coming through their news feed, then they'll be manipulated by the left, which is lying and saying that these things aren't happening when absolutely people in the government are evil enough to do them. But if you believe everything that comes across your feed, then you're probably going to get sucked into some of these that are just people posting enthusiastically in the fog of war, we'll put it. So.
And the last thing I want to add just very quickly on that is you got to be careful. Sometimes sometimes you're wrong and it's fine. I do actually think some of these, there were attempts to present like a GOP October surprise. There's this account like Black Insurrectionist that was posting these allegations that Tim Walz did X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And I think it just turned out to be totally fake. And there's for a fellow on Twitter, I forget his name, but he did a whole thread talking about how that is like a form of basically psychological warfare, or like, you kind of, or maybe not psychological warfare, but the idea that like some stuff out there bad people might be trying to get you to spread it. So it's like, oh, look at how wrong and stupid they are. So just something to keep in mind as well.
Ops everywhere.
Yeah.
All right. Flimpler says, there's seemingly no Madison Square Garden protest. This was very telling. That's a very good point. That's an area where you very easily, obviously extremely left-wing, you could have had a lot of people out there in the streets if that energy was there, but you didn't see any of it, right? Yeah.
No,
you were there.
I heard from one person that there was one person yelling at the crowd at one point, and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably a sign. We've got is it Cyril's probably? Thank you, sir. Love your work, Auron, and great guest as always. Thank you very much.
All right.
Only the finest guests here. I promise you a guest you'll really enjoy. So I try to deliver here.
Every time.
Nicholas says it's strange to tune in without hearing various contemporary hip hop artists blaring as Patrick struggles to maintain composure. I'm not sure what that reference is, but probably
I've done streams in the past where it's like just hanging out, talking about the news. Maybe if someone wants to donate, I'll like put a song on that they like, and people eventually realized it was funnier to request music that they know I'm gonna hate than something I like. So it's
let's see here. Enjoyer says Nevada Supreme Court ruled that the state can count mail ballots that arrive without a postmark up to 3 days after the election. Yeah, I mean, obviously election integrity is going to be a huge deal. That's something that really needs to be focused on post-Trump, especially when that space gets opened up at obviously the federal level. Doesn't get to dictate all of that, but it does give you a certain amount of leeway that then states can clean that up. So that needs to be a huge issue. And then Admiral Snack Bar says, seems like Trump regretted his appointments, but even if he doesn't want more Middle East deployments getting lied to or tricked into by adversaries, or Netanyahu is not out of character. Recall how he armed up Ukraine. Yeah, so, I mean, obviously the fact that Trump was lied to by his generals previously is a huge problem, right? Like the fact that Milley is worried about getting in prison is probably because he committed treason and probably should be in jail. Patrick can disavow if he needs to, but I think that's pretty safe. Yeah. Pretty safe.
I support the rule of law.
That's correct.
Yes. That's what restoring order is about. At the end
exactly. Of the day. That said, I think that's only going to make him more skittish about engaging in foreign conflicts, not less. So yes, you're right. Like he was misled previously, some bad staffing decisions, too much trust in many of these institutions. These were failings. I will fully admit to these as being failings of Trump's that he needs to change, that I expect him to change. He needs to change them. That said, if you're thinking that that's going to put him in mind to be more trusting of the military this time around, to be more trusting of advisors that are pushing him towards war, I think you're mistaken. I think, if there's any lesson learned, it's going to be that actually these people don't have my best interests at heart. I can't trust them just because they happen to have a rank on their shoulder. I need to be thinking about these engagements in a very serious way. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Like I said, thank you, Patrick, for coming on. It's been great speaking with you. Make sure that you're checking out his content over on Twitter and the other places that he is writing. If it's your first time on this channel, make sure that you're subscribing to the YouTube channel. You are clicking the notifications, the bell, and everything so you know when these streams go live. If you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platforms. And when you do leave a rating or review, it helps with the algorithm. Make sure that you're tuning in to Blaze TV on Tuesday to catch all of our coverage for the election after you've gotten out there and voted. And thanks for coming by, guys. Always great talking to you.